Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan taking you through a quick preview of what is new inside Mocha VR Beta 2. So this video will cover all the features in Mocha VR, including the new feature in Beta 2, which is the Reorient module. So what you're going to be seeing today is pretty much the feature complete version of Mocha VR, minus some general interface changes and defect fixes. So we'll start off by taking you through the tracking and roto method inside 360, and then we'll go through some rendering methods, and then finally show off Reorient. So the first footage we're showing here is from Pond 5, and we've got a nice equirectangular image here, which we're going to modify in Mocha VR. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of the rig that's at the bottom of our image here. So we come up to Effect and apply Mocha VR, which is separate from Mocha Pro. And this loads the Mocha VR interface, and you'll notice that it is actually looking exactly the same as Mocha Pro. And the reason for this is that Mocha VR is a subset of Mocha Pro, which has all the Mocha Pro features, but also lets you use Mocha VR. So I'm going to load up Mocha, and we're going to launch up this. And inside here, we've got now our video ready to use inside the Mocha interface. So the first thing that we want to do is come over to the lens tool, come down here to the calibrate method and choose equirectangular. Now in most cases what this will actually do is interpret your footage automatically, and if it's a 2:1 ratio it will automatically set this for you. But in case it doesn't, you can just set it here inside the lens module. So once we've set this mode and move over to the track tab to start working, you'll see now that we have this 360 button. And if I click that 360 button, I can now pan around the view using my X key or whatever default setting I've set for my keyboard shortcut. We can also choose to now press and click the 360 button and choose which we want to look at through the camera. So we can look at the front of the camera, we can look straight at the bottom, we can look to the top, and so on. But here I'm going to go back to the front and just pan down to line up this bottom view so I can see my rig down here. So Mocha VR works in exactly the same way as Mocha Pro does, using splines to track and roto, and then use render operations to do things with that tracking data. So I can go ahead now and draw my spline down here around my rig, and we can smooth it out and we can feather it and do all that kind of fun stuff. But anytime I'm drawing in Mocha VR in the 360 mode, it's automatically being stretched out correctly into the equirectangular mode. So I can start moving this mat around, and it will also update here. So you can update either in the stretched out view or in the 360 view. So now that I've got this drawn, I can scrub through my timeline here and make sure my rig is always covered. So I want to remove this rig from the road. So the way we do that is the standard Mocha Pro method, except this time we'll do it in VR. So I'm going to draw a new layer underneath my rig here, just like so. And we'll stretch that out a little bit like so. And I'm going to turn on my surface here so I can see how my tracking data is going. So we're going to call this layer Road. And we'll call our rig layer Rig. And then we'll move that onto the top. So we have this foreground-background relationship. The rig is closest to the camera, the road is furthest away. And if we look at our track mats underneath the mat button here, you'll see that now the rig cuts out our road because it's now in front of the road. The next thing I'm going to do is come down to my link to track for the road and choose None. This means that my shape will stay in the same spot and the road will move underneath it, updating my tracking data, which is represented by this blue surface here. And again, everything that I'm doing is coming out into that stretched out mode when I click the 360 button. So I've set up my road now, and I'm going to turn off my tracking for my rig because I don't need to track my rig. I'm just going to go ahead and start tracking the road in perspective. So what you'll notice here as we're starting to track is that it's going to move my surface along. And if we switch out of 360, we can see that that surface is stretching correctly off into the distance in our equirectangular mode. So this means that the surface is warping correctly in the 360 view and inside the equirectangular view. And this is very, very important because it means that when we render later, the image data is going to stretch correctly as well. So I've done my surface there, like so, and at any point we can use this to actually insert a clip. I could go ahead and insert a grid here, for example, and then that would feed in, or we can feed a layer directly from the insert clip using insert layer. I don't have one here right now, but we could pull that from the timeline. But in this case, we're going to use the remove module to now get rid of our rig here. So I'm going to go back to my 360 mode and select my rig, and we'll move back to the start of the timeline. And we'll go over to the remove module. So inside the remove module, we can optimize how many frames we use to remove with, and this can be very important when you're doing long shots. But here I've got a nice short shot, so I'm going to start rendering using these settings and start rendering forwards. Let's just turn off our matte and our surface so we can see a little bit better and start rendering. So what's happening here is that the rig is now being removed using that tracked data from the road that we made before. And if we again come out of 360 mode, you'll see that that's being updated correctly in the stretched out view. So this is a really, really nice, fast workflow inside Mocha VR. You're not having to flatten anything out and then work on that and then redistort it. It's all happening natively inside the Mocha environment. And everything that we do here can be then updated either by rendering to clip, or we can actually just close and save. And now inside the After Effects environment, I can come down to choose render and then just choose remove. And now it's going to update directly inside my timeline here. So this is very, very useful because it means you don't have to do all of the back and forth that you would have to do normally with, say, a Mocha Pro standalone, but at the same time you're not having to do any additional lens distortion modifications because it all happens directly inside the plugin. We can also use Mocha to help with doing rotoscoping, where normally you would have to create more than one spline to clean up a shot nicely. So for example, if I wanted to do color correction on this car here, you can see that it's actually splitting over the seam, which we'd have to update manually by doing two separate splines or doing a different kind of warp to make sure that we connect it all together. Inside Mocha, we can actually look in 360 and roto in a much more comfortable way, and then Mocha will handle the rest by creating two separate mattes for us. So let's have a look at how that works. I'm going to load up my dialog here, and this dialog here is just telling us we're working in proxy resolution, and we can also switch that back to full if we want to be rendering at full resolution. But if you want to be a bit more speedy, you can actually load up a proxy. So I'm going to suppress that warning so it doesn't tell me again. And we're back into our Mocha mode. So I'm going to hide these two rigs that I've just made, and I'm going to start looking at this car here. So if we go back into 360, and I'm going to pan around here, and we'll come back into our original view. So we want to roto out this car. So I'm going to come to the end of the shot and get that into view. And if we look back in our equirectangular mode, we can see it's split over both sides. Now, there's nothing stopping us from drawing in this mode, but it's much, much easier to take our X-Spline tool and start drawing in this mode instead, so we can cover the entire car in a much more comfortable fashion. So I'm going to just do a quick roto around like so. Let's just smooth out the edges a little bit. And like there. I'm going to do this fairly rough for demo purposes. So we've done this, and again we can look at our matte for that. But once we go back out of 360 mode, you'll see that it's split correctly over both sides. And more importantly, it's actually creating two splines. It's not just drawing a spline that then splits over one side to the other, it's actually physically making two splines so that we get an accurate result when we bring it out back into After Effects. So I can start tracking this now. Let's go to, we'll just do a shear track here, and I'll start tracking backwards. And as we track this backwards, you'll see that when it goes out of the seam here, it'll update to just be one spline. And then we only have to deal with one. So obviously the car is not a completely planar object, so it's going to drift a little bit. So I can just now go ahead and modify either in this view or go back into 360 and start modifying it here. So we can keep on tweaking back and forth between those two views to get our roto done. And then once we're happy with our roto, we can again look at our matte here. So let's look at the matte for the layer 3, and we'll call this one car. And we'll turn off our matte for a second and go to matte for car. So we can see the car there. And again, if we go back out to 360, we can see that split across both views. So once we have this, we can now go back and close and save, and out here we can start looking at our matte. We can either view the matte inside here, we can apply the matte so that it renders down, and we can also feather that accordingly and to make it nice and smooth around the edges and start doing our color correction. And so it's a much, much nicer way. So if I go ahead and apply this matte on both sides and scrub backwards, you'll see how that matte updates over time and then pops over to the other side nicely without any render artifacts. So it's a really, really nice way to roto both sides while working in a native 360 environment. So we can also do insert rendering in the same way. It will split correctly over both sides. So if I now come back into my project and say drag in a reel, let's just turn that off because we don't need to see it here. I can come back over to my effects and tell Mocha I want to use that reel as my insert layer. And now let's go back into Mocha and set up an insert on the pavement. So I'm going to go back to my normal view and we'll turn off our car for a second and go back to that road we tracked before. I'm going to go back into 360 mode so I can see the road. Let's just move around so we can see. And I'm going to turn on my surface here. So I want this surface to actually sit on the road. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so we can see a bit better. And I'm going to move my surface over to the pavement over here. Like this. And we can move that along as far as we like because this is all on the same plane. So let's just move that all the way up there. And go ahead and choose Insert Clip, Insert Layer. And now this is the reel from the After Effects timeline directly inside the view. And so if we scrub that timeline, you can now see that moving through the shot. If we go out to 360, we can again see that split all the way around and curving and warping as you would expect. So when we close and save, and we go over instead to our Insert Composite, you'll now see that rendered correctly in the view with the right warping. So all of these tools render and mask correctly in the warped view for equirectangular mode. So I've shown you how tracking and roto and remove and insert work inside Mocha VR, and these are essentially the same way you work in Mocha Pro, but in 360 mode. So if you're familiar with Mocha Pro, the VR method is actually pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to show you another technique using lens distortion workflow, which can utilize Mocha VR's lens rendering, but then let you work natively back in the host. So I'm going to load up Mocha again. And we've got all of our roto turned off once again. And I'm going to go back into 360 mode. Now, whenever I'm panning around in this view, I'm actually updating the lens module to a particular patch. So if I go back over to the lens module, you can see we've got these longitude and latitude and field of view settings. So I'm going to set this back to 120, which is the default field of view. And now I'm looking down directly on my rig at this particular longitude and latitude. So anytime I modify this view, you'll see those two values update. So once I'm happy with a particular patch I want to work with, I can now close Mocha and actually render this view inside the Mocha viewer back to the host timeline. So I'm going to close and save. And instead of using insert render for composite or remove, I'm going to go down to lens undistort and click render. So now I'm seeing exactly the same view that I was inside Mocha, but rendered back to the host. So I can now use this to work on my own native tools inside After Effects and then redistort the patch back to the equirectangular mode. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, I'm going to duplicate my existing layer and just delete the effect from the bottom layer. So now if I solo this, you can see we've got the original clip here. So this is important for when we patch the distortion back onto the original clip. So looking at the top view, I am now going to pre-compose the layer that I've distorted with Mocha VR so I can nest it with another effect. The first thing we want to do here is actually edit and copy so that I've got that effect ready to use again. And I'm now going to do pre-compose and move all the attributes into the new composition. And I'm just going to call this one VR Undistort, so I know where it's coming from. So now that I've got my VR understort actually comped into a nested composition, I can now go back and paste my effect, and you'll see a bit of a funky look here because we've pasted it back on. But what I can do here now is go down to module renders, and instead of understort, I will choose distort. So the beauty here is now it looks like nothing has happened, but what has happened is we've actually repatched our pate back to the original comp. So I can now go into my undistorted view and start editing. So I'm going to open up the undistorted view. So say for example we want to do something basic like draw a shape to block out our rig here. I can now put this over the top of him. I can write some text here, let's just say Mocha. And when we go back into the undistorted view, you'll see that actually flattens out correctly in this view. This is because we're doing all of our native work in the nested composition with the rendered patch, but back inside the standard composition, it's being redistorted by that lens distort. So now when we go through the timeline, you'll see that it's actually updating correctly and that patch is working as we expect. And this is a very, very fast workflow because it is just a lens distortion. There's no heavy processing that needs to be done here. So it's a really quick way to patch or blur or add effects to one area of your VR comp and then get it back into the original Echorectangular comp. So everything that I've shown you so far was in Mocha VR Beta 1, and there's been obviously some performance improvements and stability changes and all those kind of fun things. But now in Mocha VR Beta 2, we've introduced the Reorient module. So I'm going to go and show you now how the Reorient module works and why it's so useful. So the Reorient module solves a big problem, which is dealing with the fact that horizons distort horrifically when you're using a free camera. And using a free camera causes a lot of bad motion sickness, and it also just doesn't look very nice when you're wearing the headset. So this is a great picture from the CPIX Japan, that's from Makoto Hirose, thank you very much for lending us this footage. So we want to stabilize the diver here, who is wearing the rig on his scuba equipment. And you can see it's got nasty distortion, and we don't want to get rid of the overall motion of the boat or the ocean or anything like that. We just want to make sure that this horizon is not so nausea-inducing. So I'm going to stop, and we'll go back to the beginning of the shot here. And I've already applied the Mocha VR plugin, and we'll go into Mocha and show you how this works. So inside Mocha VR, we have this new tool called the Reorient module. But the first thing we need to do is track something near the horizon. In this case, we've got some nice horizon, so I'm going to go and track this hill over here. So I'm going to go back into 360 mode, and let's go find that hill, which is around on this side. And we're going to draw a new shape here, and go all the way around, and just get this hill like so. And again, if we look back in the Echorectangular mode, you can see that this roto is split over both sides, but that tracking is going to be quite nice. So I'm going to click on perspective here, and we'll start tracking. So again, anytime we're tracking in here, we can switch back out of 360 mode and see it updating in Echorectangular mode. So I'm going to pause the video here for a second so that you don't have to sit through a long track, and I'll talk to you at the end. So there's our track finished. You can see it's all nicely updated and moving all around the place really erratically, even in that nice bend at the top of this splash in the water. It's really cool. So once we've got our track, we can go now over to the Reorient module and start using this tracking data to finish off the job. So switching over to Reorient, and we'll go back to the start of the shot. So the first time you come into the Reorient module, you won't see anything happen because we need to set up the horizon first. And to do this, we're going to turn off the preview button up here, which is this P next to the 360. So I'm going to click that off. And now what you'll see is this red line coming across the shot here. Let's just turn off our splines here for a second so we can see that a little bit better. Like so. So there's our red line. So we want to be able to set this up to match the horizon, and we can match it either in the 360 view, or we can match it in the stretched out view. And I find it easier to work in the rectangular view, but your flavor is what you like. So we can modify the horizon either by adjusting the fields here in the horizon align section of the reorient module, or if you prefer a more visual tool, we can turn on show control and then move this up and down to fit our horizon a lot better, and that will update the fields accordingly. So here we've actually fit it reasonably well. We can also rotate to do our roll here, like so. Move up and down to adjust the tilt, or move back and forth to adjust the pan. So there, now it's fitting a little bit better. So once we've got our line fitting our horizon approximately, it's now ready to go. I've turned on my cog already. This is by default turned on for this track, and this tracking data is now going to try and move that horizon to fit the overall warp of that horizon, as you can see. But when we turn on preview again, it's going to flatten out that horizon completely. Let's just turn off our visual control there. So now when I scrub through the timeline, what you're seeing is actually a completely locked down shot. You'll see the spline moving around because it's still hunting for the original, and we can turn that matte off. But the actual view is completely flattened out now. So if I play that back, we've got a nice solid view. We're getting the boat moving around smoothly, but the actual horizon itself is rock solid. So if we turn off the preview, you'll see the difference. There's a massive jump between the distorted view and the flattened out view. And then obviously we can render this out here or back to the host timeline. So if we go look in 360 mode, you'll see the same thing. If I turn off preview, it'll be tilted dramatically. If I turn it on, it'll be nice and flat. Now this may not be enough. If we go back into our equirectangular mode and go back to the beginning, say for example that we actually want to view this from a different angle. Well, first of all, we can either adjust the smoothing to only adjust things like tilt or pan or roll, but also we can customize the actual view of the horizon by modifying the camera. So if I go back into my 360 mode, and this is my default front view, say for example, I don't want to be looking in this direction, I want to be looking behind me. I can actually go ahead and modify the pan to look in the opposite direction on either side, and then that will be my view by default. And I can also adjust things like the tilt and the roll. So it's not just smoothing the overall result, I can customize the actual view as well. So if we come back out of 360 mode, I'm going to turn on show control, and this is exactly the same as the horizon align control. We can control the roll here, the pan, and so on. So I might move this around to about here. And now if we look at the difference between this shot and this shot, we've got a completely smoothed out version of that roll. So I'm going to turn off tilt and roll because I want to keep that horizon nice and flat and just keep that pan going. So I could move this around here by the field or use the control as well. So the difference between the original and the flattened out view is quite significant. So if I move to another area of the shot here, let's turn off that control now, and again move here to here, we can see dramatic changes in the lockdown version of the shot versus the adjusted shot. Now there is one more thing here with the smoothing. Say you don't want to actually lock down the shot completely, you do actually just want to get rid of some overall jitter. Well, we can do that too. We can turn off maximum smoothing here and just tell it to only adjust maybe 10 frames of jitter or 3 frames of jitter, and then that's only going to get rid of the subtle shake in the camera, not the overall creative decisions made in pre-production. So overall, we are getting a lot more control in the reorient module to either smooth it out completely, adjust the overall jitter, and then actually fix the control here to exactly where we want the camera to land. So I'm going to turn back on maximum smoothing, and we'll go and close and save. Now back inside After Effects here, we can do exactly what we did with the other module renders. We can come down to Render and choose Reorient, And then that's going to give us our nice, clean, flattened out view. And again, because this is a warp, it's a very, very fast one to update. Obviously, it's not going to be real time, but you get some good feedback of the overall composition here. So that is the Riori module in Mocha VR Beta 2. Mocha VR Beta 2 is available now, and if you're not yet on the beta, please do sign up via support@imagineersystems.com. This has been Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan. Thank you very much, and goodbye.